What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 773. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, how's your week going?
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good. You know, we're really closing in here. I got a couple weeks left before I doubled the amount of kids I have, which is not a small amount to begin with. And so, you know, I'm enjoying one of the last couple weeks of that, and then it's on to new things, huh?
Doubling season is upon us shortly, no doubt about it. But we've got you for now, and we're going to be talking about Duskmourn, of course. We've got actually a bunch of topics to do. We're going to do a crack-a-pack this week, and we're also going to talk about the red-black sacrifice deck, and we're going to talk about cards that maybe you should be paying more attention to. They're kind of the marginal cards, but when they are important, they're very important. We've got a list of those to go through, and a bunch of other stuff as well.
Yeah, I was actually inspired by the show you did with Cheon, where I was talking about cards that neither of you had ever played, which really just shows that, you know, your inexperience with the format and my incredibly deep knowledge. But really what it comes down to is there's a giant group of cards that you basically always have access to in a draft, or it's uncommon that you will not see some of these cards because no one's taking them. And there's ways to use them. They're not cards I play all the time, but I think there's some value to be gained there. So I'm looking forward to talking about that. Yeah,
so we'll get into that as well. This show is, of course, brought to you by you via Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources. You get a thank you card and a sticker in the mail if you sign up for any level, and we appreciate everybody who supports us on there. The show is also brought to you by Ultimate Guard, and we've been talking about this a lot, but I wanted to talk about it one last time before it actually happens, because it's happening on Friday. This is the Magic Online Vintage Cube Live, powered by Ultimate Guard. I'm probably going to have to say that a lot because I'm going to do the coverage for it. So basically, I got a bit of a busy weekend coming up, flying to Vegas tomorrow. And then when we go live on Friday for World Championship, I'm going to be covering that. And then once I'm done with that, I'm running over to the other booth to cover the Cube tournament, the Magic Online Vintage Cube Live. And if you haven't heard of this, I'm sure you're probably aware, but the broad strokes is that Ultimate Guard teamed up with Daybreak Games, who runs Magic Online now. It's also, by the way, where Ryan Spain, the original co-creator with me of Limited Resources, works. He's the creative director over there. Which is pretty cool.
So you're saying there's some nepotism involved here.
Yeah, how? I didn't get him a job.
He starts out at Daybreak, you know, after co-founding LR with you, and then now, guess who they pick when it's time for coverage?
Oh, yeah. Because that's how that went. When they reached out, I was like, dude, I have to cover the tournament all day. Like, this could be bad. But the truth is, I really wanted, come on, like, I'm not going to miss the opportunity to cover this thing.
Well,
go ahead.
I would only say that if someone wants coverage that's not in the pocket of Big Daybreak, then I'll be co-streaming it as well on my channels, which, to be clear, Ultimate Guard actually asked me to do. So, it's with their blessing. But yes, you could also listen to me if you want. Probably me and BK. You know, we'll see.
So if you want the goof stream, you can go to that one. If you want the serious hard-hitting stream, Reed Duke and I will be covering it live from the event there. Either way, we hope you'll watch, because the players that have qualified for this, there's 8 of them, and they get to sit down and draft a real life version of the Magic Online Cube. Total value of this thing's about $65,000, and they get to keep the cards. Like, the cards that they draft, they get to keep, and also the entire cube will be given to the players there. We'll show you how it's going to be done on the day of, but the whole card pool, because as you know, with the cube, you know, there's cards that aren't drafted each time you draft, and that's the case here as well. So again, that's going to be Friday and Saturday, and you can check out that. Should be pretty cool. One other cool thing, Patreon question of the week. Luis, I'm going to throw this at you, and I'm going to give it a little bit of a curveball, but this one comes actually from somebody named Marshall, so that's kind of cool. Marshall asks, Wizards of the Coast marketing team contacts you. They want to designate a power 10 through 18 as part of a marketing campaign, and they want your input. They would like to include at least one card from black, red, green, and white, but is there no blue here? I guess not. And if you...
Well, blue already has...
Because blue has extras? Yep.
But if Time Walk, Ancestral, and Time Twister.
But if you don't think a color has something on par with Time Twister, that isn't necessary. what cards are you nominating? So I'm going to throw
Demonic
this to
Tutor, Swords to Plowshares.
Oh, I love this. Go.
So that's just easy. Wheel of Fortune.
Mm-hmm.
And green doesn't get one. Cool. We've solved it.
Is there no green card?
I mean, the closest green could have is like Channel or Fast Bond, I think.
Yeah, Fast
which
Bond
are powerful cards in their own right. And of course, I have a soft spot for Channel. But if you were to ask me, like, what is the power card of that? It's like, yeah, I mean, I think that Swords to Plowshares or Balance are both like really good for white. Like those are both iconic and powerful. Channel is kind of those things. Fast Bond's kind of those things, but it's like lower on the iconicity and the powerfulness. So it would actually feel a little like Time Twister. Time Twister kind of doesn't feel like part of the Power Nine in a lot of aspects, though. It's funny because it's like the most expensive one besides Lotus.
Is it really?
Thanks to Commander.
Oh, yeah. Wow. I didn't know that. That's wild.
Which is pretty crazy.
Would there be a gold card? Are there any icon, that meet this bar, at least approach this bar?
A gold card.
I think there's not.
Yeah, I'm not thinking of one off the top of my head. Honestly, like something like Lightning Helix would be like pretty high up on the list, but that doesn't feel right to me.
Right.
So actually, I'm gonna say Balance over Swords to Plowshares. It feels more Power 9 like.
Okay. Yeah. More broken.
And I guess I would do Fast Bond just to complete the cycle, because if you're trying to do a cycle of for marketing here, you don't want to just leave out green. But yeah,
right. I like it. Those
Birds
are great.
Of Paradise. I don't know.
Yeah, birds would be on there. Great answer. Okay, let's do a Crack-A-Pack for Duskmourn first up, because we got a lot out of the Crack-A-Packs with Paul for sure. Here's our first card up is Enter the Enigma. This is the blue sorcery. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. Draw a card. I have never seen this cast. I have never cast it myself.
I cast this card a lot, actually.
Honestly,
I've been playing Omniscience Draft over the weekend, and this card is a totally passable card there.
Ranked Omniscience Draft for Louise. How about in Duskmourn?
No, I don't think this card's very good. It's just the thing is, there's no blue spells deck really, so like it doesn't even get that value. And I think the Fear of Failed Tests is like the main combo with this, where you hit them and draw 2 cards or 3 cards. But I have found it's better just to not draft that card and not draft this card. Right.
I was going to say it's 2 bad cards trying to come together. Yeah. And this is a perfect example of something that we're going to hit on in this episode where, sometimes certain types of cards fit into a certain archetype, but not into others, or they're fringe playable in, their color, but they're not. And then also, even if you zoom out further and go from set to set, if there was a blue-red spells deck, Enter the Enigma would probably see quite a bit of play. In fact, it might even be good. There's a lot of the blue-red spells decks where your creatures get bigger. They have some type of prowess variant on them. And this is the type of card that can punch through 6-8 damage, get you a card back, trigger it, etc. But that isn't true here. So Enter the Enigma just kind of falls out the basement. Next is Slavering Branch Snapper. The green
land cycler is the one I play the most.
It is for me too.
It's not a card you have to really prioritize. It's a fine card, though.
It is okay.
You're happy to play the card.
It is. When it hits, it's like, when it hits the battlefield, it's like, yeah, that's really big. And trample really matters in this set, too. So it is playable. Next is Daggermaw Megalodon. This one does not see much play. I don't really play this one much either. Hitting land drops for the blue deck is not hard.
I have been pretty unimpressed with the Megalodon. It just doesn't really make the cut.
Acrobatic Cheerleader, the 1 and a white 2/2 survival gets a flying counter.
Yeah, it's a playable card if you need another aggressive 2-drop in like red, white, or blue, white, but it's not particularly great outside of that.
Yeah, and I would call it an underperformer in general. It's just it has the same problem that all the survival cards have. Next is Grasping Longneck, the 2 and a green 4/2 reach, and when it dies, you gain 2 life and it's an enchantment.
I really try not to play this card. It's an okay sideboard card. It can fill out your types for Delirium, but it's just not particularly good.
Doesn't it make you feel warm and safe when you get it on the battlefield, though?
Kind of.
Like it trades for kind of everything. If it dies, you gain life. Your Delirium goes up. Like, what could possibly go wrong? Next is Resurrected Cultist. This is a 2 and a black 4/1 that you can Delirium, bring it back for 2 black.
I don't like this card.
Me neither.
You play it. It always trades for something that costs less mana, or frequently does. And then by the time you could bring it back, you just don't want to spend 4 mana on it.
You're doing other stuff.
Look, the card that does kind of what this promises is one I want to talk about later. It's Fear of Infinity. We'll get to that, but I like Fear of Infinity a lot. I think it's a good card in the right deck. I think the Cultist is basically just bad. I try not to play the card.
Next is our last common, which is Turn Inside Out. This one ended up performing quite well. This is the combat trick that gives +3/+0 for just a red at instant speed, and if the creature dies, you manifest dread.
It's a really good card. You just have to have cheap fodder, basically, to kind of maximize it. And once you get there, it can really perform. Like when it lets your 1/1 trade up for their 3/3, and you get a 2/2 back for 1 mana, like you're really cruising.
Yeah, it also is the most like face up combat trick where, you know, your opponent will attack and you go, oh, right, okay, you have turn inside out, and then you just have to decide if you want to allow them to do that. It does make it interesting later in the game because +3/+0 can be a lot. You know, that could be the difference between winning a game on, you know, that turn if you fire it off on an unblocked creature as well. Next is first uncommon. It's Veteran Survivor. This is the white 2/1 with. This is the kind of survival that I want where it doesn't really matter. Like I'm playing it as a 1 mana 2/1, and then it just has this nice upside of, you know, dinking a graveyard. And then sometimes it even gets big, although that is kind of hard to get it to that point. But still, this card, I mean, I like this guy. Veteran Survivor is a card I'd never cut from any of these white decks.
Yeah, I think the Veteran Survivor is totally fine. And sometimes it messes with their graveyard, and sometimes it can become, you know, a 5/4 hexproof. That is a thing that can certainly happen.
Really annoying when that happens too. Next, this is where I want to be, Luis. Patchwork Beastie. The green 3/3 with Delirium, and it can't attack or block unless you get Delirium, but you can mill a card on your upkeep.
Yeah, I love the Beastie. I think Patchwork Beastie is quite strong. Great start to a red-green or a green-black Delirium deck. Fine in green-blue. Certainly the card I would be interested in taking right now.
Definitely. And one thing you brought up, I think it was actually back during the set review that has come true and has become maybe a little more important than it seemed originally, is that cheap cost to flip it up, if it does happen to get Manifest Dread, is really nice. There's actually not that many good deals in the Manifest Dread space, right? Like a lot of the time, you're paying 3 mana, but it's still just a 2/2 or 2 powered underneath anyway, so it's not that big of a thing. Occasionally you'll hit like a Branch Snapper and then you can go, haha. But for the most part, that hasn't been a dynamic in the games that I've played that have been that's been super important. But with the Patchwork Beastie, as long, you know, as you time it correctly, yeah, it can. And that can actually win combat for a really, really cheap price too. Brood Spinners next. That's the black-green 2/3 reach. And when it enters, you surveil 2, and then you can pay 6 mana, tap it, and sack it to make a number of 1/1 flyers equal to the card types in your yard. Good payoff for that deck.
Yeah, I think that Brood Spinner is quite good. I would take Patchwork Beastie over Brood Spinner. Definitely. Just solely because it's 1 color versus 2 colors. I just don't think you need to overcomplicate things. Like you should just take the card that is going to go into your deck more often. Yeah,
and I mean, that's a good litmus test, right? Because if the green-black deck was better, more supported, it's good. But if it was even better, you probably would take a Brood Spinner. You know, if I put, you know, other, you know, Gremlin Tamer or whatever, something else here that you're like, well, if I get into that deck, like I'm winning this draft type of thing, where green-black doesn't quite have that appeal. So, you know, it's better to default back to the Patchwork Beastie and try to pick up the Brood Spinner a little later. Oh, here's another good one though. Silent Hall Creeper. That's the 1 and a blue 1/1 unblockable. And then you get to pick from the little list of a counter and draw a card or have a copy of thing when it hits them.
Oh yeah, this would be my pick. I don't mind starting in blue. And one of the strengths of Silent Hall Creeper, it's even more flexible than Patchwork Beastie. It's good in blue-white. It's good in blue-black and blue-red, even though those are archetypes I'm not really that interested in drafting. Mm-hmm. And it's good in blue-green. It's just good in every blue combination. And I like blue-white and blue-green. Patchwork Beastie is at its best in red-green, though also good in green-black. And then in green-white, well, green-white I think is really bad, and this card's bad in green-white. Mm-hmm. And then in green-blue, it's fine, but it's not amazing. So I would, just take the Silent Hall Creeper.
I like that. And we did get a double rare pack here as well. So I've got another card to pick from. It's Nashi, Searcher in the Dark. which is the blue-black 2/2 Menace. It's a legend. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you mill that many cards, and you can put any number of legendary and or enchantment cards from among them into your hand. And if you put no cards into your hand this way, you put a +1/+1 counter on Nashi. Blue-black's just not enough of a pull here to even consider a card like this, right?
I don't think so. Like, I would rather not play blue-black. And I don't think starting with a blue-black card that's even worse than a mono blue card makes any sense. So
right,
yeah,
of course not. Yeah. Okay.
I would certainly not do that.
Yeah, I would definitely have it down to these uncommons. These last three cards, the Patchwork Beastie, the Silent Hull Creeper, or maybe the Brood Spinner would show up for me. I also do like the Veteran Survivor, but for me it would be Creeper, Beastie, Survivor, and then Brood Spinner, even though I think Brood Spinner is probably like my favorite card out of those because that's the kind of game I want to play.
Yeah. No, I agree with that.
Okay. Let's talk about Rakdos, because we have mentioned it a few times on the show over the last couple of weeks, but we haven't really gone deep on the Rakdos Sacrifice deck. And I was writing an article for Wizards, it's actually up now, about draft leading into Worlds. And this, I didn't go deep on the archetype itself, but I did when I was researching around for some of the cards. One of the things that you and I, Luis, have talked about since the first week of the format has been one of the things that we really like in a format. And it's this sort of thing that appears in different ways. One of them is that an individual color pair can have nuanced archetypes, right? You can have the blue-red version that's this, or you can have the blue-red version that's this. And that doesn't always happen. A lot of times it's more straightforward. But then going one step deeper than that, you have what we do have in this set, which is the idea that certain cards can be quite strong in some archetypes and really medium or mediocre in others. And to me, red-black is kind of the poster child for that. Because, there are payoffs for it that are even just at common that in that deck are really, really, really good. And in other decks are just okay. And that's the kind of nuance that you need to know, before you sit down to draft, especially at a place like World Championship or something like that. But to me, Rakdos Sacrifice is like kind of the archetype for that.
Yeah, I really like Rakdos Sacrifice because it, A, is very good. That's part of it. Mm-hmm. B, it's a high synergy deck, so there's a lot of things to keep in mind while drafting. And as you mentioned, it can be a control deck, it can be a mid-range deck, it can be an aggro deck, it can be all of those at the same time. Obviously, every limited deck defaults towards mid-range at its base. Like,
right.
You take the average deck unlimited of any format, it can have draws that are aggressive, it can have draws that are a little more controlling, it's just going to end up kind of playing towards the middle. Obviously, the more slanted your deck, the more you get one kind of draws versus the other. Like Boros decks, in this format are almost always aggressive. I did have a really good controlling Boros deck.
Oh, okay.
That had ghostly dancers and a bunch of rooms and red removal and stuff. Mm-hmm. But that was the exception. The majority of the Boros decks I've had or played against are just trying to beat you down. Rakdos isn't quite like that. Like, yes, you can have a Rakdos deck that is quite aggressive. Your opponent's not going to know which one you are, because I've had a lot of Rakdos decks that win by just killing every creature the opponent plays and drawing a bunch of cards off Disturbing Mirths and whatnot. So it's just got a lot of flexibility to it, and I think that is a ton of fun. I think that really amps up the format, and I generally like that gameplay. Black-Red Sacrifice is one of those decks that they keep going back to. Yeah, and I just find it to be perfect. Like, it's just a really fun archetype when it works out.
Yeah, they should not go away from that. I mean, for a set here or there or whatever, but that is what you think of. So it gives you that kind of comfort level with it. But also, there aren't other archetypes that try to do that. It is specific to this two color pair. And when they lean into it, it is really fun. And it's the only deck that does this type of thing. How do you normally get into the deck? Like, if you're in the draft, how do you find yourself in Red-Black Sacrifice?
I think that the easiest way to find yourself in that is Disturbing Mirth. That card is like kind of the headliner card for the archetype, and for a good reason. It's just a really, really strong card. So in general, what I end up doing is when I get a third or fourth pick Disturbing Mirth, when I have one of the two colors, that's often a good sign. You also could just be kind of taking black and red cards and noticing they're open. That is always something that can happen. But I think a pretty typical way is you'll start with red more often than black because red's a better color. Let's say you first pick an Irreverent Gremlin. It's like a solid card. You're reasonably happy to take that card. And then you'd pick a Scorching Dragonfire. If I saw a third pick Disturbing Mirth, I would take that over almost everything. So it's like, oh, great. This is like the perfect on-ramp into red-black sacrifice. If I saw like a Final Vengeance there, that wouldn't be enough to necessarily dissuade me from taking another card if there was like another comparable card, in another color, or better yet, in red. But really, I think Disturbing Mirth or sometimes Sawblade Skin Ripper. Sawblade Skin Ripper is not good enough to jump into the deck when you see 1/4 pick. You wheel that card a lot, actually.
Yeah.
What happens for me, I think actually Clockwork Percussionist is one of the biggest reasons I get into red-black, because I take Percussionist super high. I don't mind taking it in the first couple picks. It's that good. And if I have 2 of them in the first 4 picks and then I see a Final Vengeance, I am in. Like that at that point you're like, because Percussionist is at its best in red-black. Well, it's actually just about as good in red-white. It's just such a good card. But it's a fantastic card, and it also works really well with some of the other good red-black cards. So I would not be unhappy to jump into it if I had that kind of start.
Yeah, and you mentioned Final Vengeance there. That is one of the big payoffs for the deck, because it's one of those ones that we've been talking about recently where it really does benefit you to go a little bit deeper if you're going to use, for example, 17 lands data to try to guide your drafts. If you just kind of do the default that we have, right, which is I'm just going to go for game in hand win rate and just take a look at what this thing's doing, right? And so like I'll look it up right now just to see where it lands at common. I somehow had the rares up there as well. And it says it's 56.6%. And so that might make you think a little above average, good, fine card, right? Like an okay card to put into my deck, right? But if you've ever, you can filter on 17 lands by color pairs, basically by any number of colors. So like, for example, if I do that for black red and I take a look at the commons, the black commons in black red and see how it rates, it's 59.2. And that puts it at the top. That's the best black common in the archetype. And so you're thinking, oh, okay, well, so that makes sense. It's better in black red. But if you think about it for a minute, you're like, wait a minute, but that means by default it kind of has to be worse in the other colors, right? And the answer is yeah, it is. And this does get nuanced. Luis brought this up when we were looking at this before the show, that the overall archetype win percentage is going to affect that significantly. So you have to take this with a grain of salt, but still Final Vengeance in, for example, the worst deck, blue-black, is only 53.5%, right? So it's like way worse there. And even in a decent deck like black-green, it's still okay. It's 56.4, but that's not 59, right? Like that is just above average. Current average for this is, in the 55.5% range. So this is, above that by just a little bit. And so to me, this is a really good example of if you're playing with experienced players and they're drafting according to, how things have been playing out so far, at least, you're kind of the deck that wants Final Vengeance, and you're the deck that can play more than one Final Vengeance, where everybody else wants either 0 or 1 total.
Yeah. So one of the advantages you get from playing black red, and one of the reasons, again, we like this format, is cards vary so wildly in value that you're pumping the fist over your 7th pick Final Vengeance, which is like getting a 7th pick Scorching Dragonfire.
It is.
For a normal deck. But other people are also just not taking it even when they're in black because it just doesn't fit what they're trying to do. And the green-black deck would much rather have like a Manifest Dread or something over a Final Vengeance. And you're not, they might even want Winter's Intervention over Final Vengeance if they don't have good things to sacrifice to it. So you're getting to pick up a lot of that extra value.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess this is normally true for these other cards as well. But you talk about Disturbing Mirth and Sawblade Skin Ripper. I mean, you're the only one that wants those too. Right? Nobody's splashing those cards. So like if they get opened and you're the one red-black drafter at the table, you're getting them. What about stuff to sacrifice?
So there's a lot of fodder. Again, this format, it supports the all the different archetypes fairly well. You get like Vengeful Possession is one of the great ones because that's another one. That's the threaten that you can rummage. That's another one that no one else wants. Like really, it's just not that good anywhere else. And you're going to be really happy with because stealing their thing and then sacking it is just like a classic, incredible value play.
That's the payoff, yeah.
And I think that that one is a really strong one. Disturbing Mirth is actually both a sacrifice fodder and a sacrifice outlet, which is part of why it's so good. The double Disturbing Mirth draws, when you're like, play a Fear of Lost Teeth or a Percussionist, Disturbing Mirth it, then a turn or two later, Disturbing Mirth, you're Disturbing Mirth, you get to draw 2 cards, you get to manifest, you just get so far ahead of your opponent on this. And then you've got like Percussionist, Innocuous Rat, Fear of Lost Teeth, kind of in that order. And those are all great. And then you have Ticket Booth is a really good one in this deck because A, the deck can go long and wants to like go into Tunnel of Hate and start doing that. B, it just puts 2 pieces of cardboard on the table. It puts an enchantment and it puts a manifest, and you can sacrifice whichever one of those you want, And so there's a lot of that stuff. Glassworks is another card which is fantastic in this deck, often you're just going to play it, kill their thing, and then sack it to your Disturbing Mirth if you don't flip it, which is also good. So there's just like a ton of ways to get value. So that core is really easy to assemble. I don't think I've had a black-red deck that didn't have some kind of sacrifice component. Have you had one?
No, not at all. I think it's the only reason to go in here, mainly because of the uncommons. Like they just lead you down that route.
Yeah, there's just not a big reason to do that.
Right.
And, you can have, again, more controlling, more aggressive, whatever it is you need on the side of that. But I think that the black-red sacrifice core is something that just comes up all the time.
Yeah. And it really is the key. You also do get access to, given that in this particular deck, Final Vengeance is really good, you have a really nice removal suite. Like you get Murder, right? Which, Murder has become kind of a little bit more middling, given that it's a little expensive, a little hard to cast, but it's still an effective tool that you'd like to have access to. And, as you mentioned, cards like Glassworks can do good work in decks like this too, where, it still matters, right? At the end of the day, like having access to all that removal is still really strong. And this deck has access to, one of the best 2-color combos worth of removal that you can have.
The key commons for this, obviously there's there's like the sacrifice cards, but you've also got like Glassworks, Dragonfire or Scorching Dragonfire, and Final Vengeance are all the like best removal. And then you really do want to prioritize Percussionist. Rats and Fear of Lost Teeth are both cards you get very easily.
Yep.
And part of the strength is you don't have to fight over those really. The Rat a lot of decks want, but it's still not one that you're just going to have to spend a lot of effort to get. And then Turn Inside Out is really nice in this deck. You just end up in a spot where you're getting to trade up your crap for their real cards and you get something out of it. Like it might be obvious, like you said, when your red-green opponent attacks a 2/2 into your 4/4, but the black-red person who's just sitting there on an innocuous route, like you just attack into it, you can't really not. And so it's a little more concealed because you have all these attacks that look kind of bad or suspicious because the deck often just wants to get its stuff killed.
Right.
And then Ticket Booth, very good. And Terramorphic Expanse is one I wanted to mention because it combos with the Sawblade Skin Ripper. It's a sacrifice. So a very frequent line I've run is like turn 4 Sawblade Skin Ripper, crack a Terramorphic, ping your 1 toughness creature.
That's really good. Yeah. How does the game normally end?
It depends on how aggressive you are. You can beat them a little faster by just kind of curving out and playing Percussionist and maybe a Skin Ripper. Most Valuable Slayer is a card that I often play, especially if you have fear of being hunted. So you end up in a spot where maybe you've gotten a bunch of chip damage in, but in the control versions, it's by just killing all their stuff, Vengeful Possessioning their things, Final Judgmenting their things, and you just end up in a position where they don't have any threats and you can kill them with whatever. There's not usually like one big play. This isn't like some of the black-red sack decks in various formats have like a creature that's like sack a creature, give me +2/+2, and you can like combo finish them. That's not really the case here. The one combo that does keep coming up though is Ticket Booth. As when you flip Tunnel of Hate and you get a double striker, and then if they don't block it, Turn Inside Out, they can just take 10 out of nowhere.
Yeah, totally.
Like that actually does work out pretty nicely.
I was going to ask you something. Oh, now I forgot. Shoot, I missed it. Oh, I was going to say, I remember now that it is interesting because we were talking about how this is like a synergy deck, but this is a little bit more towards the like you're trying to assemble a bunch of like little synergies, right? Like 2-card combos. Like I have, Final Vengeance plus a sack outlet, or I have a good sack payoff, or I'm just trying to get my Disturbing Mirth sacrificed or whatever, right? And these are all like little 1-2 punches, and you can just quite easily get critical mass of those. But it is interesting because it is not quite the same as like some other type of synergistic archetypes that you see where it's like, how many artifacts can I get into this deck? How many of one type of creature can I get into this deck? How many instants and sorceries can I get in this deck? And the more I can get and have a payoff plus cast or fill up my graveyard or do the thing that I'm trying to do, the more I do it, the better it gets. This is more like a bunch of little islands, a little like, okay, I got these 2 cards together and that gave me an advantage that I wouldn't normally get. Like my removal spell got me some value, right? Or something like that. Or I, again, got to take advantage of like, a common line of play that you'll see in this is just Final Vengeance and sacrifice something that gives you value for it, right? Like Mirth or even something like the Rat, right? But you have to remember that like if you do that, like let's say you play Innocuous Rat and then you Final Vengeance, you exile their thing, and then you manifest Dread from the Rat, so you got a little bit of value out of it. That's really nice. That's a really nice little 1-2 card combo. But the key here is that neither of those cards are high picks. Neither of them are on the level of giving you actual value or being a good removal spell on their own. It's only when you combine them. So you do need to make sure that when you build the deck, that you're kind of balancing out, I would call it loosely payoffs. They don't have to be payoffs in the traditional sense where you have like some uncommon that takes over the game or whatever. It can just be like Final Vengeance can be one of the payoffs and then fodder, right? Things that you're happy to sacrifice to these effects.
Well, the cool thing is, with some exceptions, like Fear of Lost Teeth, for example, these are all pretty much cards I would be happy with my deck. I mean, how often have I played Innocuous Rat in a green-black deck?
Yeah.
Like all the time. It's just a good card. So you're not giving up much. So when you have a deck that has, say, 2 Percussionists, 2 Rats, and a Ticket Booth, Final Vengeance is going to slot in great to that deck, but you didn't really have to go too far out of your way to do that.
Right.
And you don't have to pay very many costs to do that. So this is a deck that has always, based in our experience, has a sacrifice like package, but that can be as few as like 4 or 5 cards, if you really got there, maybe it's like 10 or 12 cards, depending on how deep you want to go. But you don't have to devote a lot of slots to it. It doesn't really cost you a ton there. Yeah.
But it's a good, powerful deck. It does lean into that mid-range. But, the thing that kind of separates it out for me is that these 2-card combos are fairly easy to set up. The set is designed such that you're able to do so. And those can kind of be your baseline, like the ones that I just described. But then you get some of the ones that you're just going like, oh man, like I'm probably going to lose this game. Anything with Vengeful Possession, where you steal their thing, hit them with it, sacrifice it to your other thing to kill their other thing. It feels like the game kind of falls apart on their side from that point. And, conceptually, I would say that if you lean into the sacrifice theme for this deck, your baseline cards are probably just a little bit below average, for the set. Like your baseline playing without doing the sacrifice stuff is below average, but not by very much. Like you're not like you said, the Rat and Fear of Lost Teeth and stuff. These are okay cards. Like it's not like you're putting in cards that just don't do anything unless you sacrifice them. They're still playable cards on some level. They're just maybe a cut below, where you'd be really happy. But once you get to combine them with sacrifice stuff that you wouldn't normally get at that pick, that you are getting much cheaper for, and that you get to do in some cases repeatedly, now all of a sudden it jumps it from, slightly below average to like a step above average, I would say. Like you're really kind of getting ahead by doing it. And that's just a conceptual way to think about it, because if you do have just a few of those sacrifice packages in an otherwise very good playable deck, then that's great. You've raised up that floor a bit, and maybe you've brought the ceiling down for how often you can do these things, but still your deck's really good. And if you lean into it and you have the 10 to 12 with all the payoffs and all the stuff there, well, now all of a sudden, your ceiling just got a lot higher, relative to what it would have been before. But ultimately, on average, this deck actually performs pretty well.
Yeah, I think this deck's quite good, and it's just a good deck to go into if you see that it's open.
Now, you you wanted to talk about some of the cards, some of the marginal cards. Is that right?
Yeah. So the kind of the reason I wanted to bring these up is not because I think you should play these cards all the time, and not because I think they're like good cards, but because you are going to have access to these cards and they have their place. There are specific times when they are good. And part of mastering a format, which I think I've like pretty much mastered Duskmourn. I'm a little sad I'm not going to get a chance to draft it at Worlds. That would have been cool. But
are you helping the team that you normally would attest with?
I'm gonna call in for their limited meeting.
Okay, cool. I was just curious because since you're a master of the format,
I didn't say I'm a master of the format. I think I've mastered the format.
The all-time GOAT Duskmourn drafter.
I do think that the plumbing the depths for like hidden gems is actually like a big part of how you can end up kind of giving yourself your best shot in this format. And I want to talk about cards that have their places and what those places are, so that when the situation comes up, you know that. I mean, with the analogy I've used a million times on the show is learning how to draft a format is like adding to your tool belt. And if you don't know how, like I've seen people succeed at the highest level at Pro Tour who don't know how to draft half the decks in the format, but the ones they do know how to draft, they know how to draft well, they're good decks, and they just go into those decks. They're not giving themselves the best chance, because if their seat, like to use Duskmourn as an example, if you never drafted like blue-white somehow, and your seat was a strong blue-white seat, you would be giving yourself kind of a handicap, because
definitely
you might still draft it. It's not like it's you would have an impossible time doing it, but you might lose some value doing it if you haven't drafted it.
Yeah, I think a good example that we've talked about on the show for that, Luis, is that, you and Paul had talked about loving to draft Teamer, and I started drafting it after we talked about that show, and I'm totally in. And some combination of those three colors you can usually grab onto, right? And if you're willing to prioritize some fixing, you can kind of just stay in that lane. And let's say that, during you're busy practicing for the tournament, and you of course they have to play standard too, maybe you just kind of go, I can get this often enough and it's fine, but you didn't draft blue-white, which is actually the best deck in the format. Yeah, you could find yourself in that position.
Definitely. And by knowing the uses for these cards, you'll just get that little bit of edge. And these are all cards I have played in various points. So let's start with Cult Healers. Kind of innocuous, right? 3 mana, 3/3. When you play an enchantment or an Eerie, it gets lifelink. Not a great card. And that's going to be true of pretty much all the cards on this list. But where I like it is specifically in blue-white, especially when you have Ethereal Armor, or you have a bunch of the Grand Entryway, whatever verandas.
Elegant Rotunda.
Elegant Rotunda, because if you make it a 4/4 or a 5/5 and it's going to get lifelink the turn you unlock that door, basically if you can get one good big hit in with Cold Healer, kind of go a long way. And Ethereal Armor on Cold Healer is like building a Baneslayer. You end up with a 7/7 first strike lifelink.
Yeah.
But again, if you get 1 or 2 hits in with that, they're going to have a hard time coming back.
That is the only deck I play it into.
Living Phone's an interesting one. It's the 3 mana 2/1 that dies. You get to look at your top 5, get a 2-power creature. It's really good with the Jolly Balloon Man in red-white, where you can make copies of it and find more and more stuff. Or if you have like a black-white grindy deck with like sacrifice theme, I've actually kind of run into that a little bit too.
Okay.
It's a marginal one, but if you have a pretty good chance of hitting and ways to make use of the card, it's not that bad. Possessed Goat. Oh, so this is a really funny one. I don't like this into like Turbo Reanimate deck because I just don't think that deck is good. But I had a really funny corner case come up and I wanted to point it out. This card combos really nicely with Unholy Annex. So that's the demon enchantment. The Possessed Goat's a demon if you possess it.
No way.
So I had a sealed deck for the arena qualifier last weekend that had 2 Possessed Goats in my sideboard and had 2 Unholy Annexes, and I showed BK the list. He's like, oh, you got to play at least 1 goat. I'm like, why? He's like, oh, it turns into a demon. I'm like, oh, that's great. Turn 1 goat, or like turn 3, you play the Unholy Annex, you draw a card, lose 2 life. Turn 4, you just go goat, make it into a demon, and then end of turn, they lose 2, you gain 2. Look, the goat is not a great card, but all of these cards, and this is the key with all of them, they're all kind of close to playable at their base. Again, you don't just make zeros anymore. Turning Possessed Goat into a way to make the Unholy Annex pop, that was actually fine. And I ended up playing, moving both goats into the main deck, played them both, and went 4-0 to qualify, and then, of course, did poorly in the actual event itself. But Possessed Goat with Unholy Annex, it's a real thing. Creeping Peepers, that 2 mana 2/1 that taps for a blue only for enchantments. This has ended up being much weaker than it looked. It looked like it might be okay. it's pretty bad. But I do like it if you look at your curve and you have a lot of like 4 mana rooms or 4 mana enchantments that it can accelerate to, or 6 mana and 5 mana ones you really want to pay. So I've had some decks, whether that be blue-white or blue-black or blue-green, any of those decks or blue-red. I played it, I guess, in all the combinations now. I infrequently play the card, but sometimes it makes the cut if you specifically have good things to spend mana on. Erratic Apparitions, the 1/3 that has Eerie, gets +1/+1 until end of turn, has Vigilance and Flying. Again, not a card I typically play, but in blue-white, especially when you've got Locker Room or Enduring Curiosity, the cards that basically trigger when you hit your opponent, this card's really good. It's just a really good way of getting damage, and it doesn't do much damage. That's why it's not very good. But Erratic Apparition, when you've got Enduring Curiosity or Locker Room, is just going to give you a steady stream of cards. And sometimes the card attacks for 4 or 5 damage if you've had a really busy turn and you have like a Glimmer making things cheaper. It's also a pretty...
Go ahead.
I was going to say it's pretty good home for Ethereal Armor as well.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of what you were just saying, that it's like right on that fringe of playability.
Yeah. The first blue-white deck, and the first deck I ever drafted in this format, I think, or maybe the second or third deck, had 3 of these, and they were like terrible, and I took them out and stopped playing them. But then as I played more, I found the situations where it actually did make the cut. Yeah. I got beaten so badly once by this card where I was red-white, I curved out and had some advantageous trades, so like on turn like 5, they had nothing in play and were at like 7 life. And they go like Erratic Apparition, play Ethereal Armor on it, go. It was like too big for me to attack into. I played another creature and just attacked with a menace creature, put him down to like 3 because it was the hand, the 2/2 that turns into a 4/2. On their next turn, they put Sheltered by Ghosts on it and just completely demolished me. And granted, this could have been most creatures, but the fact that it was flying and vigilance let it do double duty, and that was pretty good. Cursed Windbreaker is another one that is actually better than I thought. When we looked at stats, I was like, oh, this card actually is a little better than I thought. I didn't think it was very good. Same. But I wanted to mention it because I like it in blue-green when you've got like big things to manifest or to equip it to, and you have some manifest combos. So I've liked the Windbreaker in blue-green. I haven't really liked it outside of that, though.
Yeah, that was one that I was surprised by when we were chatting before the show started, that it was like, oh, this card's actually performing a little better than I thought, because I was in the same position you were. I didn't like it.
Cracked Skull is another one. So this is the enchantment that you put it on a creature and it dies to 1 damage. It dies to any amount of damage, and you get to look at their hand and take a non-land. This card I have found to be actually pretty good in blue-black. Blue-black specifically.
Oh, okay.
That's because blue-black has ways to sacrifice enchantments, like it's looking for fodder when you have like Final Vengeance, or you have Eerie cards you want to trigger, so like a Fear of Infinity or what have you. Mm-hmm. And it's a grindy deck that's going to try to beat all their cards. This card does let you take something good. And this is the part that has come up multiple times. You just play an Innocuous Rat or a Fear of Lost Teeth, and you Cracked Skull and they're 4/4. All of a sudden their thing is going to die to your idiot. Or this is a deck that often is casting Glimmer Bursts, drawing 2 and putting a 1/1 into play. So I got to give BK credit for this one. He had 2 in a blue-black deck, and he told me, oh, yeah, this is pretty good in blue-black, I think. And then I tried it in a blue-black deck, and I've had it in a couple decks now. That
makes sense.
It's good.
Yeah, I drafted that one blue deck early in the format, and I trophied with it, and I've never gone back.
Yeah. I mean, it's a deck that doesn't come together often, but it can be good. Derelict Attic is another card in this realm. This is the draw 2, lose 2. If you played Omniscience Draft, you're very familiar with this card. It was one of the better commons.
Okay.
And I like this in decks that don't pick up other card draw, especially decks that have good life gain or defensive measures. So one of the sealed decks for the Arena Open the one that I actually qualified with was an Obzon deck that had Derelict Attic in it. Had 2 of them, and I think it was 2, maybe it was just 1. But I was playing the card, and part of like the deck didn't have tons of card advantage, and it had good removal and it had some life gain. So I was like, yeah, it's still fine. Draw 2, lose 2 is just not a terrible card. And yes, it's outclassed by cards in general. Again, this list is not cards I'm like itching to play. In fact, if you don't play any of these cards on this list, or at least most of the cards on this list, you're mostly going to do fine. This is just if you do 100 drafts or whatever, which I don't know if I'm at 100, but I'm getting pretty close. You're going to end up playing some of these if you're maximizing your chances at the format.
Right, that's the whole point here. Yeah, again, not advocating for these to be played routinely, but specifically in these situations.
Derelict Attic, also Widow's Walk, when you flip it, when you attack with 1 creature, it gets +1/+1 and Death Touch. There's some pretty good combos with that. One is like Sawblade Skin Ripper. if you can give it, you attack with it. It's got Menace and Death Touch, and they probably will double block it because once it has Death Touch, if you sack anything to it, end of turn, it's going to ping and kill anything.
Oh wow, yeah, that's really nasty. So they either have to double block it and lose 2 creatures, or wow,
or maybe they just don't even have 2 creatures.
Yeah,
and you can even sack the Attic if you want to. If you have nothing else to sack, that is fine too. The other combo is with Fear of Lost Teeth. You attack with Fear of Lost Teeth. Now it's a 2/1 Death Touch. They're obviously not going to block it, but then when you sack it post combat, it does 1 Death Touch damage.
Oh, that's awesome.
I had that come up. I might have talked about it with, I think I did with Dissection Tools, where I had a Fear of Lost Teeth that had Dissection Tools on it, and you sack it to move it, and boom, it pings Death Touch as well. So Fear of Lost Teeth, there's actually even the next card on my list. It's a card that doesn't need much to be playable. And in fact, I play this all the time. This is actually maybe this and Ticket Booth, which is later, and Fear of Being Hunted are all the cards that are just good. And Fear of Lost Teeth isn't quite good. It's almost good enough, and I will play it without many combos if my deck is too slow. Right. It's just a good defender. Like, they play a 2/2, and you have you trade with it. That is fine. It doesn't need much, I think, to get there. So a couple ways to sack it, a couple Death Touch combos or a Death Touch combo. You're kind of there already. It's good for slow decks. It triggers Eerie, all that stuff. Grievous Wound is very narrow, and I in full disclosure, I haven't played this one yet. This is the 5-mana enchantment that whenever they take damage, they lose half their life. I got comboed out by Shattered Yard. That's the other half of Glassworks with this card. I had a slow draw. They had a slow draw, and I was thinking this was fine. I'm playing a control deck. I've got a bunch of removal in my hand. They go Glassworks on 5. I'm like, sure, Shattered Yard, and then they go Grievous Wound on 6. I'm like, what? And then end of turn, I got pinged from 19 and then lost 10 life. And
wow.
And then I just scooped because I was dead. But next turn, I would have gotten pinged from 9 to 8, then to 4, and then from 4 to 3, then to 1, and then you're dead. That is actually legit.
And those are full-on enchantments. Those are hard to get rid of.
So despite the fact that we're talking about this card now, I'm not sure that that's even great, but it's worth considering. And if you have a red-black deck that has 2 or 3 copies of Glassworks, or maybe Fear of Lost Teeth, little ping effects, maybe his Grievous Wound is good. I don't know. It's worth experimenting at least.
Do you think it would be matchup specific?
Yeah, it could also have to do with matchups for sure. You wouldn't want it against red-white, but you might be pretty happy with it against a slower green-black deck or a blue-white deck that was on the more controlling side.
Right, something that gave you inevitability against a deck that you may feel has more inevitability than you do, but it's still way too slow of a clock against an assertive deck.
Okay, here's a big one. Meat Hook Massacre 2. This is XX black, 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 black. It is the proud winner of a 49.5% game in hand win percentage, which means it's quite bad. But I'm here to argue that it is just not being used correctly. And I mean, actually, that same Arena Open deck that got me to day 2, it had Meat Hook Massacre 2, and it was great in the deck. So here's the problems with the card. It's very obvious. They're printed on the card. It's the 4 black symbols is the biggest, followed by the fact that it costs at least 6. And really, you want to do it for 8 mana is kind of the sweet spot where you're really getting good value. But the card is really strong once it's in play. Any sort of creature interaction, you're just profiting. It's kind of like you're taking a tax where whenever one of your creatures dies, you just bring it back if you have 3 life the first time. And then when one of their creatures dies, they lose 3 life. But what'll frequently happen is if you can set it up, and this is where the card is good, you kill their 3rd creature end of turn, untap, Meat Hook Massacre for 2. You lose 6 life because you just bring back the 2 creatures you sacrificed, or you sacrifice something you don't care about or a token or whatever. And then they lose 6 life because their 2 creatures, they don't really want to give you a creature. Them giving you a 4/4 is probably going to cost them more than 3 life. Obviously, if they're at 9 life, that's pretty punishing. So where I like the card is mostly in green-black because you can actually ramp there's some pretty significant ramp cards. You have, at rare, you of course have the Enduring Vitality or whatever, the 1 green 3/3 that makes all your creatures tap for mana.
Right.
You have, threats around every corner. You have Spine Seeker Centipedes. You have Moldering Gems. You just have ways to get up to, 6-8 mana with quad black, or just in a black-white deck. That's the other place I've had it and it's been good. Or black-red, where you're just removal, card draw, and then you play this as your finisher. It's a legit card. You just have to have a plan to get to the long game, a bunch of dual lands and or mana fixing, or just a 12 swamp, 5 mountain deck or something like that. Though realistically, when I've had this in black-red, it's been 10 swamps, 5 mountains, and 2 red-black lands, or, terramorphic expanse type stuff. Though the red-black land's way better because you don't want to sack expanse for mountain. And it's performed. So look for opportunities to use this card. It's not as bad as its stats may reflect.
It's just very narrow.
Trial of Agony is another card. It doesn't look very good. This is the 1 red sorcery that they choose 2 creatures. One takes 5, the other can't block. There's a couple things with this card. The primary one is if you're aggressive, the card actually just kind of pulls its weight.
Yeah.
If you're beating them down and then they have 2 blockers in play and you spend 1 mana and remove both their blockers, like that's a pretty big swing. The other thing is the combo that I think I might have mentioned that's in a different show is you target both their creatures and then you use your Scorching Dragonfire to kill their 3/3. Then they have to deal 5 to their 5/5.
Right.
Which is how that works. So
that's really cool.
Tricks with full control. But mostly it's that I think this card's stats are terrible because people just put it in their red-blue decks or whatever. I think you should put this in your aggressive red-white decks or aggressive red-black decks and not in your controlling or mid-range red-green or red-black decks. Like I think that you really, if you care about them not being able to block, which is kind of the litmus test, the card is fantastic. If you don't, then the card is kind of bad. It just kills their worst, creature or the worst of 2 creatures.
Right. That's the key, is that you have to get every little bit of value out of that thing.
Fear of Being Hunted is already a good card. People know this. This is the 4/2 that has to be blocked. But I just want to, again, say that this plus Most Valuable Slayer is just continuously impressed me. It's been very good. 2 good cards, 2 great tastes that taste great together. Even with something like Fear of Being Hunted, the 4/2, with Most Valuable Slayer. So you attack and now it's a 5/2 first strike and has to be
so mean. Yeah.
But also sometimes you just have Fear of Being Hunted in your hand. You're on the play and they play an Arabella or a Paranormal Analyst on turn 2, a 1/3. And then you just play that and the game just ends. Like,
yes.
I've scooped to that before. I can scoop quickly when I'm on my phone, but that is like a game-ending play. Like, because now what usually happens is you have a 2-drop and a 3-drop in play, and they're down a card and have nothing in play. Like, that's hard to come back from that.
It is. And Fear of Being Hunted also just hits really hard on an empty board. 4/2 is a lot of damage.
Great card. I've even found that like Glimmerlight, it works because making it a 5/3 often is enough to get it to where it gets.
Totally.
It just needs the 1 free attack where it eats something, and you're just like way ahead of the game.
Yes.
The other thing is Tunnel of Hate is a frequent combo. That was my next card on the list to see how I comboed them there.
That's a good combo.
It's the time we spend on show notes that really sets us apart. And Tunnel of Hate plus Fear of Being Hunted is great too. So I really like Tunnel of Hate to Ticket Booth. This card has gone up in my estimation. I initially thought it was just kind of mediocre, but I've now gotten to the point where I'll play like 2 in most red, black, or red, green decks and still happy to play 1 in like a red, white deck if it comes up. Blue, red, I just typically don't draft often. And then when I do, Tunnel of Fate wouldn't be good in it. So it's mostly a red, black, or red, green card, but it's really good there. I found it really is. Solid.
It feels very much like the classic good early. Like it is on 3, it's fine. And on 6, it always has an impact on the game almost. So you really are getting, 9 worth of stuff out of 1 card.
Another pet card I have is Fear of Infinity. This is the blue-black 2/2 lifelink flyer, and I mentioned earlier. And I've splashed for this card, mostly in blue-green, but sometimes in blue-white as well, kind of depending on how much fixing you have. Because if you're a deck that has good self-mill or discard outlets, I've actually splashed for it in black-red as well. Mm-hmm. If you're a deck with good self-mill or discard outlets, you can often kind of get this card as a free piece of cardboard. Sometimes you don't even have to cast it. Like sometimes you mill it with a commune or a manifest or something, and then you play an enchantment and bring it back to your hand, and then you cast like a grab the prize and discard it again. And like that card drew you a card in quotes without ever actually hitting the board or being cast. And casting it is also fine. Like one of the decks I had where it was really fun was a black-red control deck splashing 2 of these. And what kept coming up is I would play one of these and put like a conductive machete on it or attack with a Tunnel of Hate out and start like lifelinking for 4. And that really goes a long way. Plus, blue-black is kind of bad, but if you build your mana such that you can cast this card, like I had a blue-green deck where I cast this card on turn 3. It's just a high-quality card. The 2/2 flying lifelink is just really, really annoying for your opponent. So don't sleep on this card. I think this card has a lot more applications than it might first appear.
Yeah, I think the caveat with it that you described there is that it's almost always a splash, right? Yeah, so it's like that's why I haven't drafted
blue-black very often, and it's obviously fine there. But most of my interaction with the card is splashing it in a deck that meets all those other conditions I talked about. And then the last category of cards I want to talk about is these 3 artifacts: Found Footage, Friendly Teddy, and Keys to the House. If you need an artifact for Delirium, Found Footage and Friendly Teddy are totally fine, as is Keys. Keys also can help fix your mana in a 3-color deck, especially if you have some rooms. Having a 1-mana artifact that sacks to fix your mana puts a card in your graveyard for Delirium that is a type it's not the most common. And also, if you draw it in a late-game flood situation, you can just relock a room and reuse it. It's kind of like, it gives the Keys to the House kind of like really expensive cycling, but imagine a Lay of the Land, a mana-fixing card, like a Terramorphic Expanse type card that in the late game you can spend 6 mana and draw 2 cards off it. Like, that is kind of what you're looking for. So I like it. Plus, I've never done the Dream Curve, but I really hope to one day. Turn 1, Keys to the House. Turn 2, you Roaring Furnace, kill their creature. Turn 3, you unlock it, the Steaming Sauna with the Keys to the House, and you're drawing 2 cards a turn.
Oh, yeah.
Also, Keys to the House can unlock like the Funeral Parlor, the 8-mana room. Like, I've unlocked the Fractured Realm with it, the 7-mana room. Like, you could actually save mana on Keys to the House sometimes.
For sure, even though your primary use is for the fixing. Your
primary use is mana fixing. Your secondary use is to relock a room you've already used. The tertiary use is to unlock the expensive rooms. To be clear here.
Yeah.
And really, my whole point of this segment is, if you think of these cards as just bad cards and don't play them, you're missing out. Because I've had multiple red-green Delirium decks where like playing a Found Footage, because I didn't get that many Percussionists, as my like 4th artifact was really good. Because here's the thing, with Delirium, you don't have to draw the Friendly Teddy. In fact, you kind of prefer you never did. Mm-hmm. You just want to mill it when you cast your Say Its Name, and then look at your Wicker Folk all of a sudden become a 4/3.
Totally.
Like, that's what you want. You don't want to draw this card. And these cards are all narrow, but narrow implies there is a situation where they're good. They're not just bad. I don't know what the worst card in the set is. I guess we'll get to that on the set review. But like, something like, I don't know. They don't even make bad cards anymore. I'm trying to find a bad card, but I'm like, oh, Bear Trapper, Marvin the Murderous Mimic. Like, those are all fine. Saw's
Cackling Slasher.
Honestly, Saw should have been on this list. Saw I like in red-green when you need ways to get Delirium, because it lets you sack any permanent, which is pretty nice. And if you have a bunch of Percussionists, making them into 3/1s, like, they can't ignore them. I mean, honestly, the worst card in the set is probably like one of the green-white cards, because you just should typically not be looking to go that direction.
Yeah.
But scrolling through here, this is kind of an interesting. Oh, the Leylands. Yes, the Leylands are all really bad. Just never put them in your deck. But Cracked Skull isn't. Cracked Skull is not a 0. And if you think it's a 0, you're going to miss out on the times when it could be good. Plus, it's like a good sideboard card. If they have Valgavoth's Onslaught in their deck, you're playing a best of 3 match. You're playing black. I would be pretty suspicious of having 0 Cracked Skulls in my deck after that. Like, it's just an unbeatable card that costs 5 to 7 mana. That's the kind of card you want to duress for. So, as you can tell, I'm loving this format. I'm getting into the weeds. I'm now like kind of in my head trying to scroll through and look. How many cards in the set have I not put in a deck? And the answer is probably less than 10. Like,
yeah, that's awesome.
I guess the 5 Leylands are a gimme, but like past that, like, yeah, I've just played all these cards. There's just reasons to play all them. It's the sign of a well-designed set.
It is. And, we talked about that a lot this set, or this show. But if you're feeling like you're starting to bump up against that ceiling that happens for a lot of people every set, where like they start out, they're pretty good. Maybe they're ahead of the curve because they listen to our show or read up on stuff or do their own research or whatever. But then there comes a point in the format, which starts to be about right now, where we'll often get questions in our Patreon question of the week about, hey, so I feel like I'm plateauing a little bit. I kind of know the archetypes that I like, and I'm not really moving forward. This is a great place to start putting your attention, both in the type of cards that Luis outlined that you may have just dismissed as that's not a good card, so I don't play it. But also in the...
Yeah, you don't want to do what Marshall and Cheon did, which is to say, like, that's a bad card, I don't play it. Like, you want to keep an open mind.
But they are pretty bad, and I still haven't played
if you want to ask questions about plateauing, wait till Paul's, the co-host. He has a lot more experience with that.
He's not even here yet. And but there's
he's
also
doing me a massive favor.
Yeah, and he's being really nice to both of us. He probably doesn't listen to the show, right?
Well, we are going to pay him, so that
we are. He also does listen to the show.
A favor.
He usually messages us and says, "Why did you guys say this?" But the other nuance that you can have are cards that you may think are playable or good, but they're not actually in all the decks, or cards that you may have downgraded or upgraded since the initial. And like I said, I was writing that article for Wizards, and I was looking up some of the commons that you see a lot and kind of seeing how they perform within archetypes. And there's a lot of variance there. I mentioned the Glassworks is one that has a lot. A card that you and I were talking about a decent amount today was the Grand Entryway Elegant Rotunda. Right. It has a few niche spots, but basically it's a blue-white card. It really performs well in blue-white, and it's not good. It's below average in all the other archetypes. Right. And these are things that if you can tell me that for most of the commons in the set, where does this go? Where is this okay? And where does this not go? Then you're going to have an edge there, rather than saying, again, maybe you're lazy. You look up Grand Entryway and Elegant Rotunda on 17 lands, and you just kind of go, it's okay. Like I can look it up here and you can say, oh yeah, it has a 54% win percent. It's okay. I don't really play it that much, whatever. But the more nuanced take is that it's quite good in blue-white, and it's pretty much not something you want to touch in the other decks if possible, rather than this middle ground of, yeah, it's okay. It's like basically a dead average card or something like that. So that I would encourage you, if you are finding that there's a time each format where you plateau or where you kind of feel like you hit a wall, or maybe you feel like other players caught up to you, to start going a little bit deeper and really challenging yourself. If I asked you, a random common, would you know which decks it was actually good in, and which ones you should avoid it in, and which ones it's just okay in? And if you can pass that test, you'll probably see your win percentage go up as well.
My goal, and I guess I'm not actually playing the Pro Tour of this format, but my goal when I feel like I've really kind of wrapped my mind around a format is that when I go to the Pro Tour, it's not my first time playing with any of the cards I'm playing with, drafting the deck I'm drafting, or even like putting together synergies. Really, like I would like to have done all of those things in anticipation. It doesn't always happen. It would have with this set. I feel like I'm most assuredly there, but like I felt pretty dialed in on MH3 and like MKM, for example. Those are the two of the recent sets I did, and like that. I mean, I'm not saying what I do works for everyone, but like that's how I feel like you can get to the point where you're giving yourself the best shot, because you're always going to play against someone who opened better than you at some point. You're sometimes you're going to keep a 2-lander or not hit your third land. Those things are all fine, but I just want to give myself the best shot. I mean, this is true of any endeavor that I really try hard at. I give myself the best shot on the things I can control. And when it comes to draft, one of the things I can control is I can draft a lot of times and try to figure out how to get good at the format. And I feel like I've gotten there with Duskmourn, and I feel like one of the ways that you can also get there if you're someone listening is knowing kind of the use cases for all the cards. And notice there's some cards which I didn't mention, like Appendage Amalgam or Cackling Slasher. Those are actually two of the cards. Like Cackling Slasher I've literally never put in a deck. Appendage Amalgam I have, and it's been mostly bad. So those are the cards I didn't mention because I don't really see a place for them.
Right.
Sure. If you need another enchantment or you need a 3-drop, again, it's not a disaster you put any of these cards in your deck, but it's not a card I want to call out and say, oh, this is when it's good. It's just not. It's not a good card. Yeah. Whereas like some of the cards I just talked about are all cards that like have their moments. Like Piranha Fly is not a great card. But if you're an aggressive blue deck, which does sometimes happen, yeah, Piranha Fly is totally legit. It can work with all the curiosity effects, like kind of like the Apparition. It's a good target for Ethereal and all that stuff. You just have to know when to use it. These cards take a beating in the stats because people just put them in their blue-green decks, and like it's just unbelievably bad there.
Yeah, it was interesting hearing you talk about your preparedness for a draft. If you were to play in this format or in this World Championship, for example, if your schedule had lined up and everything, from my seat in the commentary booth, I can tell. Like I can tell the people that drafted a lot, and when, like, let's say you showed up at World Championship and blue-white was flowing. It's like easy mode for you, right? Like you've drafted that deck a bunch, it inside out. It's arguably the best deck in the format, and you could just cruise through that with no problem whatsoever. Yet you are also ready for if that wasn't the case. And I can tell when somebody gets a little bit out of their element in the draft seat and they're like, and they'll come, because, these are with physical cards, and people are expressive with how they hold and manipulate the cards during a pick. Very few of them just fan them out and stare. They usually pull the cards that they're considering to the front. And usually if they know right away, they'll pick it or they'll keep it to the front. And if they don't, they'll go back and forth between cards, and then you'll hear the judge say time, and then they'll take one at the last second. And that means they're not confident. They don't know what pick to make. And yes, of course, sometimes you bump into just difficult picks that anybody would take time with. But a lot of times it's because they're in uncharted territory. They either haven't drafted the deck before, or if they have, it was like one time and it wasn't quite this version of it, or it was a while back or whatever, and the comfort level's not there. And one other thing, Luis, there's one fewer round of standard each day. So like the draft in proportion to the number of, wins that you're going to be getting and trying to top.
I really didn't pick a great one to skip.
I'm very sad that you're not going to be there. I am going to, give you unrelenting crap for not being there, since I got that, for not going to the Barcelona one, even though
that's true. But
one was a little bit more way better than your choice. So. Yeah.
Twins versus, I kind of didn't want to go.
Well, it was a little more
That's
than
an exaggeration.
That, but it was not that far off. Okay, let's call it a show there, Luis. I know that you already got children that need your attention, let alone the additionals that will be coming in just a few weeks' time.
BK actually showed up at my house recently. He definitely needs attention.
Oh, so he needs a hug.
If we don't wrap this up, he's going to barge in,
Start screaming for some fish crackers or something. You can find us on social media, Marshall_LR and Luis's LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast over at lrcast.com, including, every episode of the show. So if you need to go back and catch up a little bit, you can. This show is brought to you by you via Patreon and by Ultimate Guard. Again, make sure you check out the Cube event that's happening. Again, I'll be streaming it as well. It's a Magic Online Vintage Cube Live, powered by Ultimate Guard, and it's going to be really cool. That's going to do it for this episode of the show. We'll see you next week.
I wanted to briefly talk about the Yu-Gi-Oh! That I've been playing, and by that I mean Omniscience Draft over the weekend, which is it's down now, so this isn't actually helpful to people, but I still want to talk about it because it was a lot of fun. It is actually basically Yu-Gi-Oh! Like Yu-Gi-Oh! That you don't have mana, you just play your cards. Like it's more complicated than that, as I've been learning. I've been doing a video series on Yu-Gi-Oh! Recently. I don't know if you saw, Marshall.
I have not seen that. No.
I've been guesting on Alex Simo's channel, and he's a big Yu-Gi-Oh! YouTuber, and he throws me cards, and I have to guess whether they've been banned or not. Try to put things together from first principles because I've never played the game. But anyways, Omniscience Draft was a blast because you start with 3 cards, infinite, or you can play cards from your hand for free, and you have 1 mana of any color to play activated abilities and whatnot. And it was ranked, which is really wild.
That's so weird.
I got up to like number 8 ranked. Me and BK just jammed on Omniscience Draft. I stopped before they took it down because I had felt like I had, it's not the deepest format. But I want to give you a quick rundown. In case it comes back, this will actually stand. Your order of priority when drafting cards in Omniscience Draft are, number 1, good card draw.
Mm.
Number 2, counter spells. Number 3, mediocre card draw. Number 4, cards that cycle. Number 17, ways to win the game. Like you don't need those. You don't need creatures. A 20/20 trample is worse than a cantrip. It's worse than target creature can't be blocked, draw a card.
That is wild.
At least pretty close to it. The best common in the format was Meat Locker. It was just busted. You just draw 3, discard 1. And it's funny. So Meat Locker was the best. Derelict Attic was great. Glimmer Burst was really good, better than the Attic because it was instant speed. And then even Found Footage was totally fine. Getting to Preordain and look for these cards was good. And then the counter spells were Get Out, Twist Reality, and Fear of Imposters, with Get Out being insane because Get Out was a counter for their Meat Locker.
Yeah.
But if you were on the play and went Meat Locker Attic, Get Out was then just a draw 5. You bounce those 2, replay them, and the game would just end. The way I actually won most games was irrelevant. It really was. It was either something like Balemerc Leech or Skull Crab, and you just loop enchantments, 2 Fear of Isolations plus a Balemerc Leech drains them for 20. But mostly it was just, if you draw your whole deck, you just you have to have at least 1 Malevolent Chandelier. You put it into play. You put 20 power of random things into play and have 3 counter spells in your hand, and you just say go.
Yeah.
Especially since on the play, Cracked Skull or let's play a game can make you discard their hand. Fanatic of the Harrowing was nice because there's discard plus card draw. And I think the best card in the format was probably Marina Vendrell, the 5 mana creature, because you would play her and then draw 2 or 3 enchantments usually. because she draws all the enchantments out of the top 7.
Oh, right.
And then she can relock rooms, and you can unlock them again. You can bounce or reanimate her to get more triggers.
How does rooms work? Like once they're on, do you have to like actually find mana?
So you can play either side without paying, and then you have to pay to unlock the other. So Meat Locker worked nicely because you could play the Drowned Diner, draw 3, discard 1, and then you actually had one of each color mana, so you could unlock the Meat Locker. You couldn't unlock Drowned Diner unless you put in a couple basics, which actually by the end of the format we had realized you should play like probably 2 or 3 basics in your deck.
Really?
Just because there's a couple activated abilities. One basic lets you activate Chandelier 3 times a turn instead of 2 because you had 5 mana to start with.
Right.
And like that is actually like kind of reasonable. And then it's funny, Marina Vendrell's Grimoire was also busted, the 6 mana draw 5. Like you would just play it and draw 5 cards and you would win the game from there.
Yeah.
So the format was a lot of fun. I had a blast my like first 10 drafts, and then after my second 10 drafts, I started to see, oh, this is kind of the same stuff every time. And by like, I don't know when they put it up. I think it was on Friday or something. By like Saturday afternoon or Saturday night, everyone knew what was going on. So it was like, it turned like, yes, you could still, like I still won more than I lost because like I think I had a slightly better understanding than most people, but like everyone knew the Drowned Diner was busted, and if you lost the die roll and they had 2 Drowned Diners, you counter 1, they play the second, you lose. It's that is what it is. I had a couple really wild games, but most of the games were kind of dumb, but it was fun. It's a good sometimes thing. See, this is what people thought Cube was, except Cube's actually an always thing and really good. Omniscience Draft is definitely like every 4 months playing Omniscience Draft is like perfect. Next time it rolls around, I advise you to play it. And once again, card draw, counter spells, then card filtering, and then the rest kind of doesn't matter. Like if Malevolent Chandelier wasn't in the format, I probably would have had to do a little bit more work in trying to figure out how to actually kill them. But given it was, and it's quick draft, you also had to learn what the bots don't take. They never took Get Out, basically, so I always wheeled it. Like, you just have to know which card, like, they don't care about Cracked Skull or Derelict Attic. I can't help but optimize, all right? I did a lot of these. And it was fun. I would recommend it next time, and hopefully this is a nice little guide for it.